of the morning, everyone, and welcome to the special edition, of the Waterstone Media podcast, where Taylor and I are doing another episode on collaboration with a spoiler-filled epilogue to our book, Path of the Eternal Sun. So, all viewers beware, if you have not read Path of the Eternal Sun and you would like to have a spoiler-free experience, turn back now. I think that is all I have to say. Do we want to switch it up, or Taylor, do you want to go first? Because I know that you are eager to share this story of Shin.
Yeah, I'll go first, then we're alternating. I think that makes sense. I will make a note, too, that as we finish the Beast story in the last episode, I noted how well Ryan reads stories, and I'm assuming it's because he practices by reading to his child in the evenings, whereas I don't tend to read to my dogs. They don't appreciate it. I tried, but...
So, fun fact, I actually did a lot of speech and debate when I was younger, and was actually, I was actually very good at it, so...
The speech part or the debate part?
I've had some practice.
That's fair. All right. Well, we can jump into Shin here. My unpracticed. Oh, I'm just going to quickly do this. And I'll be honest, I don't know. It's not a ton of spoilers for in mine, I don't find. But we'll see what happens. There's a bit of spoilers. All right.
Mine definitely spoils like the first 9 or 10 chapters, so.
I think mine only spoils the first like 2 or 3. We'll see though. We'll see. I could be remembering wrong as well. After she spoke with Yuki, Shin realized that she didn't know what to do with herself. She was exhausted beyond measure, but the thought of trying to sleep made her laugh. She was lonelier than she'd ever been, but the thought of company made her feel ill. The only thing that appealed to her was to keep moving. So, she settled Harmony comfortably across her back and started to walk. At first, she wasn't sure where she was going, but there was a ringing in her ears that persisted long after the din of the battle had faded, and it only seemed to recede when she put distance between herself and Dahl. So she walked towards the only place on Elos that made any sense. Home. Her head slowly cleared, and, while the ache in her muscles remained, the tension that they held released more and more with each step. Soon, she knew where her journey was really taking her. She retraced her steps. She knew there was no way her footfalls were landing in the exact same spots as they did that night, but in her mind, she was walking a mirrored line that took her back to the person she used to be. It was a nice image, but it shattered when she reached the deadfall. She wasn't sure how long she stood at the edge of the trap without daring to look in. She hadn't looked that night either. At the time, the idea that she was only indirectly responsible for this death had been a solve. Now, it seemed more like a burning infection creeping into a wound that hadn't healed. After a moment's indecision, Shin continued her walk without peering into the hole. She continued retracing her escape and crawled through the tiny door into the family barn. Familiar smells triggered a flood of memories that washed over her and threatened to drop her to her knees. She saw her father's friendly smile and heard her mother calling them in from their chores. Even as tears prickled her eyes, she smiled. Those memories were hers, and no fire, no sentinel sword, no invading force could take them from her. She stood in those memories a moment longer before steeling herself and leaving the barn. All that remained of her childhood home was charred lumber and thatch. As hard as it was to see that destruction, she knew the next part would be harder. She took a breath and turned to look at the heads of her parents, but they were gone. The wooden stakes that had so grotesquely decorated, remained in the ground, but the heads themselves were gone. Shin sprinted across the property and looked around frantically. She hadn't realized it when she set out on this journey, but she needed to bury those heads. The idea that they had been taken, probably taken by some scavenging animal, meant that even in death, she had failed them. Shin collapsed to her knees and felt a sob beginning to form in her chest, but footsteps behind her pushed it down. In one smooth motion, she was on her feet with Harmony at the throat of her assailant. Shin, is that you? A wide-eyed youth said with hands up in the air. Samuel? Shin was so shocked that Harmony fell from her hands. Shin, we thought they killed you. A torrent of emotions churned inside her. Samuel had tormented her endlessly. Rage and fear were all she knew when it came to him. And now her tormentor was the only tiny thread that attached her to her past. It wasn't fair. She punched him square in the nose. The satisfying crunch was only made more satisfying by the look of surprise on his face as he fell back on his ass. Shin started laughing. She knew it was a maniacal, desperate laugh, but she couldn't stop it. Her emotions needed an outlet, and here it was, painted across her childhood bully's face with blood. Please don't kill me, Samuel said, once Shin had more control of herself. I'm not going to kill you. Probably. Depends on why you're here, Shin said. I brought these, Samuel said, and held up a tiny bouquet of wildflowers. I bring them for your parents, for their grave. Shin stood in shocked silence for a moment. Where is it? Samuel got up warily and wiped the blood from his nose. He led her to the base of a giant tree that her mother and father would often sit beneath to watch the sun rise. Samuel gingerly placed the flowers on a makeshift totem. Who did this? Shin asked. I did, Samuel said, and after seeing a look of surprise in her eyes, smiled warmly. I know I was awful to you, Shin. I know it. But your parents were always kind to me. Maybe that's why I picked on you so much. My father had nothing for me but a belt. Meanwhile, your parents had love enough for you and some left over to feed a poor neighbor's kid. I should have looked out for you instead. Instead, I tormented you. Just like the sentinels you always looked up to. Shin couldn't resist the dig. Not anymore, Samuel said quietly. I'm going to find the Bandit King and join his Mugon. After what the sentinels did here, I see what they are now. We all do. Shin looked up at Samuel's once cruel face and saw only a scared, downtrodden youth, but one full of hope. They stood a moment longer in silence, and Shin sent Samuel on his way. After saying goodbye to her parents, she walked back to the deadfall and looked down upon the first man that she had killed. It wasn't fair that her parents were taken from her, that her life was upended by the cruelty of people who thought of her and those like her as less than human. But even in death, they could inspire change. Even in death, she could inspire change. She owed it to them to do the same in life. I was wrong. I had it right the first time. Even in death, they could inspire change. She owed it to them to do the same in life.
Dude, that's awesome. I don't want to say too much because I want to read mine first, actually. And then we can talk about them.
Okay.
But if I may say, you had some really beautiful lines in that piece. That was really nice.
Thank you. Yeah, there was a couple there that made me really happy.
Yeah, really
painted
good.
Across her tormentor's face in blood was pretty good.
I like the imagery of the infection like crawling in through the wound. I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, that one I had to change. I think I said to you, I remember I said to you that I was writing it as a epilogue to the second book. Like that's where I started it. I wrote, it was like 100 words. It wasn't much, but I had to rethink the whole idea. But it actually worked out well because it just kind of, that one flowed really quick. I think I wrote that in 20 minutes. Like it was one of those pieces that just kind of came out. So it was nice.
That was really good. Okay, let me read mine because I think you're going to smile at some of the things here.
Okay, cool, yeah.
Shin rode awkwardly in the saddle as the old horse carried her deeper into her past. She still wasn't sure this was wise, but she couldn't focus on the path ahead until she dealt with the history that haunted her. When she'd suggested returning home to Yuki, she'd expected the older woman to dismiss the idea with a sharp wave of her hand. Instead, Yuki encouraged the journey. She even ordered Steph and Korin to accompany her. The two rode behind Shin, allowing her space and silence. Their presence only increased Shin's guilt. They needed every hand to repair Doll, and it seemed the height of selfishness to run off when there was so much to do. She'd said as much to Yuki, but Yuki disagreed. You'll need your mind clear for what's coming. We can spare you for the day it will take you to ride there and back, she said. They were already in familiar territory. Shin's feet had walked this stretch of road hundreds of times over the years, and it wouldn't be long before she caught sight of her farm. It took all her courage not to turn her horse around. Her breath caught in her throat when the farm came into view. Memories hit her with all the force of beast fists. She squeezed her eyes tight to keep them from watering. Fortunately, her horse needed little guidance. It ambled forward as she fought the conflicting feelings warring for her heart. After a brief eternity, her breath returned to normal, and she opened her eyes. The frame of her house still stood, the timbers looking like charcoal. Everything else was rubble. The sight made her remember the night she had fled, smoked out of the house like prey for the sentinels to hunt. Besides the house, the farm looked exactly as she remembered it. The dichotomy between the familiar land and the destroyed house left her conflicted inside. She dismounted and handed the reins of her horse to Corin, who took them without comment. Shin saw no evidence of her parents' bodies, but that was a question she wasn't ready to confront yet. She walked around the property, with no particular destination or purpose. The sights brought her no peace. They only raised more questions. She spun at the sound of someone approaching through the woods. Her hand went for Harmony, but it stopped when she saw who her visitor was. Shin? Samuel asked, his eyes fixed on the long polearm that lived on her back. To her surprise, he carried a sword at his hip. The last time she had seen Samuel, he'd been trying to take food away from her. It was lifetimes ago, and he looked nothing like the boy she remembered. Less than a year had passed, but he'd become a young man in that time. It was in his eyes, and in the way he carried himself. Samuel? He shuddered, and she swore she saw tears forming in the corners of his eyes. I thought you were dead, but we couldn't find your body. The words poured from him. We found your parents that night, then buried them together in an unmarked grave. I couldn't believe what the sentinels did. I knew your parents had food, but who didn't? Your parents were always good to my family, even when I tormented you. It damn near broke my mom, seeing what happened to them. She made me swear to give up on my dream of becoming a sentinel. Finally, he paused, and Shin digested everything he'd just dumped on her. She'd never known him that well. They were no neighbors with almost nothing in common. She'd never seen the side of him. Did you? He nodded. I always thought that becoming a sentinel would allow me to protect and feed my family, that it would save me from a life of working the land. Better to take than be taken from, right? Shin hated the logic, but couldn't fault it. But I can't, he continued, not after seeing that with my own eyes. He broke out of his reverie, his eyes focused on Harmony again. What happened to you? I found a way to protect that which is still precious to me. I became Sin. Sin? He couldn't hide the doubt in his voice. They're real? We saved all, Samuel. Drove the sentinels out and fought off invaders. We are trying to fix what's broken. Then, to punctuate her claim, she drew Harmony, spun it smoothly over her head, then threw it. Before it had gone more than a few feet, she called it back to her hand and returned it to her back. The demonstration silenced any questions he might have. He stared at her, eyes wide at the physically impossible feat. Teach me, he said. It's not my place, but if you travel to Dal, you'll find training. He bowed to her. Let me show you your parents' graves. Shin let Corn and Steph know she would be fine, then followed Samuel into the woods behind her old home. He led her to a bare patch of dirt beneath a tall oak. The setting was tranquil, and relief flooded over her. She knelt down and placed her hand on the grave. The mere feeling of the dirt eased a knot in her shoulders. Her parents, at least, were at peace. They wouldn't have to suffer in the coming war, and that was something. She took a deep breath and stood. They would have loved the location. Thank you, she said to Samuel. It's the least we could do. And thank you. I'm going to tell my parents I'm heading to Dal. He turned to leave, then paused. What will you do? She felt her resolve grow even deeper. There was no doubt in her mind. Not anymore. I'm going to kill all the sentinels and save Samus.
That was great. It's pretty funny
Thank
how
you.
many different things were similar between ours.
Yeah, apparently everybody gets buried under trees in our stories.
Mm-hmm. It's a good marker.
It is. No, I was just laughing because all that we'd agreed on last week was we're going to write about Shin going home and meeting Samuel.
Yep.
And it was fascinating to me how similar those stories ended up being, even though they were still different.
Yeah. Yeah, we both had Samuel coming around. I wasn't sure if you were going to have it be like a, that there was obviously a temptation to make him like be one of the sin, continue to be a dick, like blame her parents for, have her have the strength to stand up for him. To him, there could have been that. But no, yeah, it ended up being the same. And like very...
I honestly thought you were going to have her kill him. Just dead.
Just one smooth motion.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, no, Shin. Dead.
No, that didn't feel that like it would be the right character development for her. I still wanted her to stand up to him, but it was... I liked the idea of making it almost like dismissive. Like this is what I used to be scared of, just as a example of all the things that she's gone through, right? So
yeah.
But
very cool. Dude, I like your stories.
Thanks, man. I like yours. I guess that's why we work together.
Yeah, it's true. I guess I don't have anything else to say. I was just very impressed by how similar our stories ended up being, even though they were different stories. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, for sure. Sure, just the same parameters. It's kind of fun. We should do stuff like that more often. Just like set a parameter, a subject, and just see what happens.
That was I really had a lot of fun writing these stories. So
yeah, me too.
For those of you who don't know, I was actually on vacation, but I was writing these stories because I was enjoying the idea so much. So
yeah, for sure. No, it was good. I thought I would enjoy the Beast one more, but then that Shin one I really enjoyed it.
It's a cool setup with Shin, right? Like. It's an interesting conflict that ties together very barely loose ends. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's good.
Cool. Well, any closing thoughts? Any closing comments?
No, I think that's good. If you're listening to this one, it's the spoiler edition, which indicates probably you've read the book. So thank you for that. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you're coming here for more, then I would assume you did. So that is nice. It's fun to play in that world. I'm excited to continue on with the second book and push our way through here.
Sounds good. Well, once again, a huge thank you to everybody listening. I'll just echo Taylor there. You will be able to find these stories on our website in fairly short order, and transcripts and all of that as well. So until next time, have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.